Hey folks, Shin Lacoste here with another segment of All Wyse Transformation, where we talk about mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care. And today I have an awesome guest with me, Peterson Toscano, who is not only a biblical scholar, but a playwright, a performer. I'm an activist. Oh my gosh, Peterson. Hey.
It's so good to see you after so many years, actually.
So many years. Yes. Yeah. It was in Bennington, right?
It
That we
was.
first met. You came down because you were doing a show. I forget the name of the show that.
Well, it could have been doing time in the Homo Nomo halfway house.
Yeah, I think that was the
Uh,
one.
that's my
Yeah.
ex-gay expose.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That was like at least what 18 years ago or something like
It's
that.
got to be something like that. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow.
But we haven't aged a bit because we know the number one rule of self-care is it's never too young to start moisturizing.
That that is true. And I also say don't forget to eat your spinach.
Oh, that's good too. Yes, very good. Yeah, because
Um,
people are going to be around for a long time. They need to be prepared for a long life.
yes, yeah, because for those of us who are able-bodied, like this is your body. You gotta make the best of what you got.
Hmm.
So Peterson, I like to start off with the question of what are you curious about these days? What gets your curiosity going?
I'm definitely curious about the future. I do lots of mental time travel to the past and to the future. The past gets a little boring because really the only thing I mean, I like a lot of the things about the past, but it's usually like living without electronic devices, which I actually don't have to go to the past to do that. But that's what I seem to enjoy most in my past travels. But I am very curious about a the future and not utopia or dystopia, because that doesn't require a great deal of imagination, but a workable world where there's
Hmm.
still issues. There's going to always be issues,
Yeah,
but that life is better and that the world is a little bit better and we're just keep moving along, which in some ways is very radical and queer to imagine such a thing right now.
mhm. Yeah, and I think when we like you said when folks think about the future, they sort of think about like a dystopia, post-apocalyptic, and I'm like, well, does it really need to be that? Yeah,
I mean,
that's
that's one option.
yeah, yeah. It is one option. It
Yeah.
is one option. So I was on your blog, just scrolling along on your blog, and I saw that you had some really interesting posts that if you don't mind me inquiring more about.
Okay. That goes way back too. I'd be like, this is the way back machine. Okay, here we go.
So one of the posts that I saw you had was when the church welcomes all, but not consideration applied, right? Um,
Right.
and
Right.
and then second one was sex, marriage, and the Bible. It was a conversation you had with like I think a Dr. Jennifer. But let's start with the gender and Bible there. Like when you were creating that particular post, what was going on in your head as far as far back as you could reach to remember that?
The one about everyone's welcome, but some conditions apply.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Like churches are so dishonest so often because they'll have a big all welcome sign, but they really want a certain demographic, typically young families with children. And so I actually imagined what would it be like if there was if like some Christian company offered churches different welcome packs based on the demographic of the people. So like it was like the young family with two kids, white, middle class, they get the super PAC, like with like all the bells and whistles, like we want you here. And then, depending on who you are, you get less and less stuff. And finally, if you're like a recently divorced woman or a queer person, they basically give you a list of all the rainbow churches and say, here you go. And we just went through this with my Quaker meeting where, we were like, would say all welcome, but it's like, we need to be specific because everybody says all welcome
Yeah.
and they don't mean it. And even as Quakers, we don't want like some violent, loud people in our meeting. Like
Yeah.
we have a certain aesthetic that we're trying to maintain.
Yeah. 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 I am. I have to say, when I first attended a Quaker meeting, it was for two friends, Ann and Sidel. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, yeah, they're lovely.
They were getting married, and they sort of asked me to be part of the wedding. Like, well, it's sort of within the Quaker tradition. I was like, I know nothing about Quaker. So, like, okay, I'll go to a meeting with you and sort of just check it out. And I and that I think it was that first or maybe the second meeting. I can't remember which one it was, but I was sitting in silence, and it was the first time that I think I ever noticed my heartbeat. And I was like, oh, what an interesting thing. And
Hmm.
maybe like a minute or a second later, literally the person across from me started talking about how we take our hearts for granted. And I was just like, what?
Yeah. There's something about sitting in silence with other people. It's very hard to do on one's own, I find.
Yeah,
Like I can do it for an hour easily in Quaker meeting, not every time, but often.
yeah,
But alone, it's like exercise. You got to build up to it. But I think one of the best gifts we can give to ourselves is some time of silence, of
yeah,
stillness.
yeah. How did you get into Quakerism, or that practice, or that belief?
I had been living in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm from Connecticut originally, but I was living in Memphis and finished up a conversion therapy boot camp, which failed. Surprise. And I came out gay in Memphis, but then I was like, I need to go back north. Got a job at a private school in 2001. And like my first week there, like the end of the week or the next week was 9/11 attack. And everything was like crazy all of a sudden. Like the whole world changed. Talk about silence. Like it was a beautiful day, September 11th. Gorgeous summer day in Connecticut. I moved back to Connecticut and there were no planes because they were all grounded. And it was so peaceful and quiet. And you thought, how could anything awful happen today? It's so beautiful. A woman at the school where I worked was Quaker, and she had been talking about it. And I was like, I need to be with people of faith. And I went to a Quaker meeting, and everyone was in a stunned silence.
Mm.
And nobody gave a message. It was a whole hour of silence. And I loved it because I realized I sat there, I calculated I had listened to over 1,500 sermons in my lifetime. And I was like, I don't think I need to hear another sermon,
Yeah,
but I need to hear the silence. I need to hear the spirit through the silence because I've been drowning that out.
yeah, yeah. So is that how you got into biblical scholarship, or like is that like a different field for you?
Yeah, there's all these little weird windy paths that kind of turn back on themselves. At age 17, I became a born again evangelical, conservative, anti-gay, Republican Christian. It was the
Okay.
MAGA movement of its day. And in fact, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was being taught white Christian nationalism. But I went because I was gay, and it was during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and I was terrified I was going to die. And I was terrified that I would then go to hell. So I pursued this path of becoming straight through conversion therapy and spent 17 years in conversion therapy. And the whole time I wanted to be a missionary, to go and spread good news or be a medical missionary, like do something. And I studied the Bible, I became a Bible scholar, but I was always, in the eyes of the leaders, disqualified because I wasn't straight enough.
Hmm.
Even when I was celibate and not doing it, was still like there was that tinge of pink about me that they just couldn't do. And I began hitting up against the stained glass ceiling that the women always bumped up against. And as a result, I did study a lot of the Bible. And so after I came out, two things came back to me from my past. One was biblical scholarship. So I used the tools that I learned in the evangelical church to look at the Bible in Hebrew and Greek, but I looked for different things that they didn't tell us to look for. I looked for gender non-conforming Bible characters.
Mm.
And applying the very same tools, I found them all over the place in the Bible and wrote a play called Transfigurations, Transgressing Gender in the Bible that's now a film and it's available on YouTube for free.
Yeah.
That was,
Can I just say the colors that you have on there are gorgeous?
oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. We filmed it. It was 100 degrees in Portland, Oregon. And you couldn't have the AC running because we're filming. Everything had to be quiet. So literally, they had to keep putting my face back on after every scene. But so that brought the Bible scholarship back. But there was a time in my past that I was a missionary for a short time in Zambia, and I was helped run a radio station. I didn't know anything about radio, but this billionaire wanted to have missions around the world. He got me a personal trainer from the BBC to teach me radio production so I could run this radio station in Zambia. Years later, I'm out, I'm gay, I haven't done radio in years. 2012, I have an apocalypse about climate change, freaking out. And I was like, wait, I used to do radio, right? Maybe I should do some podcasting. And I began using those skills. And now I that's what I do professionally now. I work full time producing podcast shows for various nonprofits, primarily about climate change, but also about faith and queer issues. So both the Bible scholarship and the radio production came from the evangelicals and have been cleansed in the rainbow now.
I love that. I love that. And I would imagine that through that process, writing was sort of a consistent thing because one of the things I think that you do very beautifully is really convey what you're thinking and feeling to the audience. And I've seen you perform, I've seen your YouTube, I've heard you speak, and I think you do a beautiful job in sort of conveying that the thought and mind you, I'm probably seeing the finished product compared to the struggle that you go through in trying to create all of that stuff from the comments from the playwrights that you do and the shows that you put on. I'm curious about that writing process for you. Like, how does that look like, or how does that feel? Is there a certain time of day that you sort of like, I need to sort of write in the morning, or is it a matter of getting inspirational readings from the Bible or conversations that you've had with folks? I guess I'm trying to tease out like your from your thought down to paper. Like,
Yeah.
how do you sort of translate that? If that's not a too long question.
No, it's not. Part of it depends on the kind of writing I do. So these days, I've been doing a lot more creative writing, both short stories and personal essays. And that is very early morning work for me. It requires like deep concentration and lots of refinement, of course. And I have a writers group then I go to with work and get feedback. And I've learned through this process that writing, it can be very much a community project. And there are very few writers who can take full credit for their work because people give you feedback, and that's so precious and important. And that's the only way you can improve at the end of the day. There's only so much I can do on my own before I get some feedback from people. So there's that process. When I do a play, though, it's very different. In fact, when I do a play, I have almost no words written down anywhere except like a little scrap of an outline because I'm a character actor and I shift from character to characters. And it's interesting because there's so many marginalized people who become solo performance artists who play multiple roles. Like Whoopi Goldberg, she got her start in comedy, but then she did these amazing one-woman shows where she could just take on all kinds of characters. John Leguizamo is another example, Lily Tomlin. And in a way, we do solo shows because we were isolated because of our minority status and because we had to learn code switching and being able to speak in different languages. So I, in a way, harness that skill and embody a character. And for me, it's not just the words, but literally the whole body. So when I was writing the scene for Transfigurations, when I'm playing Deborah, the warrior poet, as I was writing it in my head and in my mouth, I wore combat boots and I marched around the house in combat boots because I wanted to get this weight of this woman, the gravity of her, the bigness of her, because she was so intense that the general, Barak, his name was Barak, said he would not go to battle unless she went alongside with him. And so I was like, okay, this is not some little like floaty little thing. This is there's substance here. So I let my body help me form the words and the lines and really soak in the person's experience. Another example was with the Ethiopian eunuch, which is a very famous story from the book of Acts. what a strange backstory if you're a eunuch, because often you were abducted as a child in war, taken to a foreign country, and then against your will, you're castrated. And many didn't survive, but those who do, they do survive. They're made to be servants, slaves, and they never experience puberty. They never go through that and develop the secondary sex characteristics. So they have high voices, they sound different. And because they're close to power often, they get a certain amount of respect, but they're also, and you see it in all the ancient literature, they're also looked down upon because they're not seen as a real man. And they can't have children either. They can have sex, but they can't have children. So thinking about this Ethiopian eunuch who was so drawn to the Jewish faith, went to the temple, but he gets to the temple and I'm thinking, well, where does he go? Because it's so gender divided. Men there, men and boys, women and children. Where does this eunuch go? And how do they feel where everyone has family? And that's just not in the cards. So, like, soaking in that, I sat for days and days as if I'm in the chariot that's in the story, reading from the prophet Isaiah about a lamb that was slaughtered, that was sheared, that was, against its will, was tortured, and who can speak of his offspring, for his life was cut off. And it just gave me a whole other view of this character and of the reading of that text. But it was my body that helped me. It was embodying that character, which is strange because I have lots of body issues. But when I'm on stage in character, I am fearless because fortunately, none of my characters have body issues. And I could do the most extraordinary things on stage that I can't do often in real life.
Yeah. So where was that spark for Transfiguration to start? Like, do you remember
I
what you were
do.
reading, or like what was like, oh, there's something here that I need to explore further, or create a performance out of? Like, do you remember that spark?
Yeah, it was two things that pissed me off. Both of them pissed me off. The first, I was with some, cisgender gay guys, and I was still fairly new, a new, fledgling gay. I mean, it was in my 30s already, but still, I had just come out, and I was appalled at these white gay cisgender men who were so overtly sexist and racist and so ugly towards trans people. And I'm like, what the heck is this about? I'm just like, I just left an oppressive religious world, gonna land in a rainbow one. So that was the one thing. And the other, I was at a workshop in England, and we were doing a bibliodrama where we explore a text through theater. And this guy comes up to me and he says, "Oh, I found another gay character in the Gospels." And there was like notoriously just one in the Gospels, this Roman centurion. I'm like, who's that? Oh, you know the story about the man carrying a pitcher of water that led them to the Passover? I'm like, yeah, that person was gay. I'm like, really? How do you know? Oh, because back then men wouldn't carry water, only women and children. So he must have been gay. I'm like, or trans, because this is a gender difference. And yes, gay men can have gender differences, but what we have here is a gender difference. This is a story of gender nonconformity, which could be a gay story, but we can't be stealing other people's stories.
Right.
And that pissed me off. So for both of those things, I said, you know what? If I have to preach to the choir, I'm going to teach them a new song because my choir is transphobic and not seeing the trans folks. So then I interviewed over 100 trans people about their lives and their experiences just to learn. And I've read a lot. And with that, then I went to the Bible looking for these gender outlaws, and in doing so, I saw some similarities to some of the people's stories they told me, and wove some of those narratives in with the Bible narratives to give it a dramatic structure.
I love that. Also giving them voice and a place to sort of be seen. That and for folks
Yeah.
who haven't seen it, I'm gonna put the link to that play that Peterson's talking about. Awesome play. Again, gorgeous colors. I'm just loving it. So I'm curious. Again, to your comfort level, that um, some folks would consider conversion therapy abusive. Um, and run the complete opposite direction of religion and not do anything with it. But you seem to have done the opposite, where you lean further into it and jumped right into that. And I'm curious, does that feel different, or does that thought ever sort of come up to you in the sense of like, my words, not yours, what you've gone through was very traumatic in the sense of conversion therapy, and most folks just would have been, I'm done. I want nothing to do with it. Don't talk to me about the Bible. I don't want to hear anything. But you just leaned further into it. I'm just curious about that practice or that insight.
It wasn't my original choice to lean into it. Because I assumed I couldn't carry on as a person of faith once I came out, because for years I was told you can't be gay and Christian. So I kept trying to lop off the gay thing so I could be a proper Christian. When I came out gay, I then assumed I couldn't be Christian, I couldn't be religious. I aspired to be an atheist and was a terrible atheist because I would just spontaneously like think of God and pray. And I was like, that is not an atheist move. So, and I realized that like I wasn't missing the church. I
Yeah.
definitely in fact, going into churches would trigger me because even if it was a friendly church with rainbows, it still looked the same. They sang the same songs, but I felt like a tugging still because the reality is I'm wired for God.
Mm,
I'm wired for like divinity, for these existential things, just like I'm wired to be gay.
mm,
And if I'm going to be honest about who I am and be authentic, I've got to embrace that part, work through a lot of the crap that I had, and get good therapy. And there's nothing like good therapy. And I always encourage people to get it, which was a challenge because I was abused by a form of therapy. So
yeah.
I had to get over that hurdle too. But in the end, I opted to become Quaker because it didn't remind me of the worlds where I was abused. And I've seen this with other queer folks who want to get back to faith, but they'll go to a completely different tradition. Like they may have been like a Baptist and then they become like a Catholic and love that ritual and all. And so I think partly it's a way of dealing with the trauma by finding another route to do it in. While other people, I think their lives are easier. I kind of wish I were like able to just walk away and like, I don't need God, it's fine. But some of us, that's who we are. And we got to respect that.
Yeah. Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I feel like growing up in the Catholic Protestant church, going to church every Sunday and then sometimes even Saturday and sometimes even during the week. And so much came with that, from me not feeling wholeheartedly being validated by the church, and various statements of, just because of my sexual orientation I'm going to hell. It's just a given. There's no debate about that. It's
No,
like,
no collaboration on this one.
no, it's like,
Negotiation.
regardless that I've been a president of my high school class, that I've won track and field, that I've volunteered my time in high school at the hospital, right? And like none of that mattered. It was just like automatically.
And that was even for people who never had anything from somebody else in their mouth or their butt or anywhere else, just that they had those
Yeah,
feelings.
yeah, yeah.
And it seems like it's so cruel because what they're asking people to do is to live life without relationships because they say, well, you can be celibate, which isn't the hardest thing in the world, but you also can't be close to anyone
Yeah.
because you could fall in love. And so you can live with these walls around you. And it's a very cruel thing that they're asking people to do that they're not willing to do themselves.
Right, right. Yeah. And I agree with you that I do feel hardwired for not only spirituality but for the ritual and practice
Hmm.
of what comes with that. And I think you're right, like in the sense that also asks for community, right? Like, it's nice and it serves a purpose as sort of having your own personal practice, but sometimes it's nice sharing that practice with other people as well too. Yeah. To your comfort level, are you writing anything new these days, or is it strictly just helping folks do podcast and I think you're also doing a climate change podcast too, right?
Yeah, I do two climate change podcasts. I do two Quaker podcasts. I'm like all over like doing a lot of I have my own podcast. I'm like the guy who's in construction, but his house is the one that's like still unbuilt. That's with my podcast. Mine's always like late and I'm working on everybody else's, but working on that. But I been working on lots of essays. I just wrote one called Camouflage. I went to DC with my husband the weekend of Donald Trump's inauguration this year just to see it. And I've been to DC a lot because I do volunteer lobbying around climate issues. And you could tell the Trump supporters right away, the young men, they were all like in camo and browns and beige, like they were about to go hunting or something. It was just a stark, kind of look. A few weeks later, I suddenly found myself almost without thinking buying a camo cap at Target. And as soon as I put it on, like the world treated me a little differently, and I felt a little bit covered. And then other like various pieces of brown clothing entered my world, which isn't a color I typically wear much. And until I saw the pink camo at the tractor store, and I was like, oh my God, what is going on? I'm hiding again because it reminds me of in the 80s when it was felt so unsafe to be gay. And it was like almost like an instinct that I learned from my ancestors because my Italian American immigrant grandparents, they just strove to be more and more American because when they arrived, they weren't even considered white. They were assigned a skin color of sepia tone, which sounds romantic, I guess. But so I realized like I was trying to conform again. And so I wrote a whole essay about this and that not only you can get some protection, you can get some privilege at the expense of other people, right?
Hmm.
There's always that trade-off. So I'm working on a couple of things, but I am finally working on a play that I've been sitting on for years. And it's almost all my plays are single person performer playing multiple parts. But this is a play that requires two actors playing the same part, but two versions of the same character, a biblical character named
Okay.
Eleazar, who is a servant in Abraham's household. And I'm working with this Quaker named Dwight Dunstan, who is a hip hop artist from Philly, a Black Quaker. We don't have a lot of Black Quakers. He's one of the Black Quakers,
And
and
try go to a Quaker meeting in Vermont.
yeah,
Let me tell you how there's very few Quakers,
I mean
Black
we
Quakers.
have a lot in Kenya, but in the United States, not so much. But we're working on it together, and it's one of those pieces I was like, we need to. I need to collaborate with someone because the idea is having an older white kind of traditional Eleazar. Everything's nice and neat and tidy. Another Eleazar who's like, no, I've been ripped off and disenfranchised in this family my whole life, and they fight to tell the story. So we've begun the process of writing that play and see what happens.
I love that. Oh, oh my gosh, yeah, just the emotional charge I could just hear from having those two characters interact with each other. Yeah.
And obviously they're both going to learn something. They're both going to
Yeah.
change and grow, and they're both going to miss important things that, they're only seeing it from their angle.
Mhm.
And like, for instance, the women are not part of the discourse, and they have a whole other picture of it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of women in that story that don't get a lot of voice.
Which I think not that I know anything. I feel like a lot of women in the Bible don't get anything. Don't get any voice whatsoever. And I would imagine that they have a lot to say.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me that there's so many women in the church because it's like it's so not welcoming to them, and they always have to do all the hard work. While the one dude is preaching, they're like taking care of the kids and they're making the coffee and they're cleaning up the mess, and the pastor falls in disgrace and they just carry on.
Yeah, yeah. How do you, I guess, distinguish or uh, between religion and a spiritual practice? Like, for you,
Hmm.
is there a difference in having a religious practice compared to having a spiritual practice?
Yeah, I know a lot of people talk about that, like I'm spiritual but not religious, which makes a lot of sense. Uh, and I think it could be like anything. You can just do it by rote, right? You're just doing it just to show up. And this is can happen on our jobs. It can happen in service organizations, right? You're just doing it to look good, to be part of a group, whatever. But even in the midst of that, in that kind of a place in a religious setting, people have genuine spiritual moments and people connecting,
Mm,
supporting each other, loving each other. That to me is deeply spiritual and deeply human.
yeah.
So it's one of those things kind of weaves in and out. Like I meet lovely conservative evangelical people all the time in my climate work. And with my work, I do work with the Red Cross now. I'm a Red Cross volunteer. And we just did a simulation of a shelter to get practice putting together an emergency shelter. We did it for 60 people, and all the food was provided by the Southern Baptists who've taken it on as their mission to provide food like up to 10,000 meals a day
Oh, wow.
at disaster sites. That is their ministry. And there was a lot of things we couldn't talk about, but that's something we were able to talk about. And they were doing it out of love, and they were doing it out of their call from God. I work with three young conservatives right now who are concerned about climate change, and they wanted to do a podcast, but they didn't know anything about it. So I was like, sure, I'll train you and help you. And I produce their show every week. It's a weekly show, and we differ dramatically on many issues, even climate. Like the way they look at it is so different from me, but we care about the same things for different reasons. And I don't know. I'm just so grateful that I have those kind of conversations that a lot of people don't have the privilege of. And so it can feel scary, like, us against them kind of thing.
Mm, yeah. What do you think is some or one of the biggest hurdles for individuals to really, for some individuals, not everybody, but for some individuals to really get like if we're not more aware of how we're treating our environment and how we're recycling and like what is that, from your perspective, that hurdle that keeps folks from really acknowledging like, yeah, the our we're affecting our climate. We're affecting like there's a in the ocean there's like this sea of garbage that's like floating around like the size of Texas from my understanding. It's like if that's out there, then how can you say that there's no issue or no problem if just keep throwing things away like it's disappearing? Like I'm curious, like how do you have conversations with folks in the sense of blockages in that
Mm.
uh, idea about that we are affecting the planet that we're living on.
Well, I take a very queer approach to climate change because I don't come at it from an environmentalist background. I come as a human rights person, and that's what really drew me to it. And people are surprised and sometimes horrified when I say things like, forget about recycling. Recycling is bullshit. Like it is such a scam. It's a fancy word for garbage. And it was really just
Organized garbage.
organized garbage. It makes us feel great. I love everything in their proper bin. I feel like the perfect little citizen, and it's just distracting from the real work. And the issue here is this problem hasn't really been created by us. It was
Yeah.
created for us. The whole
Mm.
system. The whole system is backwards with I don't know if I've lost you. Okay, no. You
No,
you
yeah.
froze for a moment. I say, I froze him. Talk climate change, they go away. That's what happens. It's every time. And so part of it is being honest about this,
Yeah.
that seriously, there's not a lot significantly I can do to reduce the amount of pollution in the world.
Mm.
It may feel significant because all the effort, like I know these people who try to like have zero waste. They walk around with a little jar with like the few little wrappers that they've collected in 3 months, and like it's a hero's journey. It's a beautiful performance art piece, but it's not a realistic way of living, right? It's just not. And the problem is we are in a system that we don't have control over.
Mm.
Even if you don't do anything but sit for a week, all of this fossil fuel is being spewed on your behalf. to maintain the infrastructure, the military, all these things. And it's disheartening when people recognize that, because then they're like, well, then what can I do? Well, what you can do is make noise, right? Like, well, what did people do when this country was not run by fossil fuels, but by enslaved Africans? It wasn't horsepower, it was enslaved African power that built the roads. And like, it didn't matter how holy you were, pretty much everything you touched had the fingerprint of an enslaved person on it. And that system, sure, you could maybe make your own little store where it's fair trade and free trade and all that, but that system had to come down, and it needed and it needed a war, and we still haven't recovered from it. We haven't really fully addressed the issue. Uh, so it's the same thing with, like, it's a systemic problem. And in a way, it's going to sound weird, but I'm so grateful that coal and fossil fuels were discovered when they were, because it may have helped move along the Industrial Revolution to get away from enslaved labor to like move into like this other thing, which came with its own problems, but it was better than enslaving people, and then it created more problems. So the reality is, we're messy people. We as a species, we always, mess thing, leave a mess, and we have to be aware of that. But we also have a system that is utterly destructive, that is run by people who are so greedy that they don't care about anything. And the fossil fuel industry has spent so much time and money deceiving the public and keeping Americans hostage to fossil fuels in ways that other countries haven't been. They've manipulated our feelings, they've manipulated our culture, so that year after year after year, nothing gets seriously done. The first president to be briefed on climate change was Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. That was 60 years ago. That's the year I was born. So climate change has been with me my whole life, right? And I did a deep dive study of the history of climate politics, and time and time again, people of good faith, Republicans and Democrats, tried to do something, and money won, money won, money won. And at some point, we need to get so pissed off about this that we really act up like those AIDS activists did back in the day, when they were stuck in a system that was not looking after them or other people.
And just wanted them to die.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ever see those pictures during the pandemic where the pollution, there was like these air shots or satellite pictures of pollution, just like how clear, especially like around China and like LA, like
Yeah.
the California area. Did you see how clear everything looked, and people were able to whoa, what do you mean? There's the sky
Yeah.
up there.
And asthma rates dropped
Yeah,
dramatically.
and so it
Yeah.
goes back to what you're saying. Like it is possible, right? Like if the collective system decided to be like, you know what, like one day a week nobody drives their car, just one day a week nobody drives, like just that alone, right, can make a slight difference.
Yeah, and individuals obviously can do things. It makes much more powerful when we do with others. Like a whole neighborhood decides to do something. That becomes a model for other people. So many things that we take for granted today started with just individual groups trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And Rob Hopkins is a great writer from the UK, and he has a book called From What Is to What If. And he's done all kinds of creative thought exercises in helping communities start to transition. It's called the Transition Town Movement. And it's just brilliant what they do, what they can imagine. And once you start getting on that level, suddenly when you get your community involved, if you want to make a difference, though, if you're like concerned about climate change, you want to make a difference, well, the bad news and the good news is it's here.
Yeah.
And it's affecting us in huge ways. Flooding in Vermont a couple of years ago, that was horrific. Just like everywhere you go, people are being displaced from their homes, getting injured. This is an incredible opportunity to build community, because the closer knit a community is before a disaster, the more people survive and the better they recover. And so if you want to do significant climate work, well, then help out with the unhoused population, help out with women's shelters, help out with just, community outreach, block parties, get people in each other's faces, get to know your neighbors. Uh, that, it seems like it's minimal, but actually it's significantly more than recycling, a lot more than recycling.
Yeah. And I obviously you do a lot of traveling. Like, do you notice a difference in how other folks from different countries approach this conversation in regards to climate change and or is it just us Americans that just don't?
I just did research about this. Climate denial is a very American thing. Like almost no country on the planet experienced a period of climate denial that was manufactured and manipulated our psyche and our culture to make that happen. Uh, but also, there's no, I just heard Jose Aguto, who is a Catholic climate person. He said, there's no country that produces oil that is actually meeting their Paris goals or serious about it because they've got too much to lose. So, so that
Do you think that's because the US is bullying people into sort of thinking a particular way, or do you think it's just because US is so popular that's
we're
become
the
like
biggest economy on the planet, well, until last week. But no, we're the biggest economy on the planet. So like we're the leaders and we've been holding the world back because there are folks in smaller countries that would love to do stuff, but they don't have the impact that we have. And George W. Bush made it so that when they went through the Kyoto Protocol, which he never actually went through, but that military is not accounted for when they do the carbon footprint for a country. So when we hear about the carbon footprint, there's an exemption for military, which is an extraordinary amount, obviously, fossil fuels. We're in a terrible, terrible place, and we're going to experience suffering. And we need to not be in denial about that. We're going to, in our lifetimes, it's likely that we'll be displaced at some point,
right?
and these things are going to get worse. And instead of like being so afraid that we deny that, embrace it, understand it, and let that inform your life and your work and your choices, because we are in such a special time in history, and our actions can make a big difference in society, not in reducing pollution. That's a system thing. So you asked about people in other countries. I know folks in Umeå, Sweden, up in the north. It doesn't matter. They can have steak 4 times a week. I mean, 4 times a day. They could drive around a Hummer. They still have a lower footprint than I do because all of their heating is central heating that heats the whole town. And it's through this garbage incinerator with all these filters that the air comes out cleaner than it is in the atmosphere.
Oh wow.
And as a result, their carbon footprint is so low because heating is their number one thing there. So they can almost kind of do whatever they want in their lifestyle and they still have a lower carbon footprint. It's the system that has to change. And we need to recognize that we're trapped in a system that, as an individual, if I have the means, sure, I could buck that system, but my neighbors can't. We need to come up together with ways of pushing against the system.
And I think there's like that little nuance I think you're mentioning in the sense of that usually individuals who are living in poverty are the ones who are probably greater affected by the effects of climate
Oh, yeah.
issues because they don't necessarily have the medical insurance to sort of cover it, or they don't necessarily have the financial means to move out of the neighborhood where there's the waste plant that's
Mhm.
literally in their backyard, right? So there is a portion of the U.S. population who strictly feel the impact of climate directly,
Yeah.
which I think as you're pointing out that we don't talk about that, right? We don't talk about individuals who have the means. They don't even have to think about it, right? Like just getting into their car, going on vacations, whatever. Like they don't have to think about any of that stuff because they're privileged.
Yeah. The privilege protects.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get into climate change? Like what was that spark for you that was like, this is it compared to like ice creams and puppies? Like why why
Uh,
why climate change and not ice creams and puppies?
like, why can't I have like a very simple obsession? I have no idea. My husband, I blame my husband. Like, again, neither one of us are like environmentalist nuts or anything. I mean, I like clean air. I like hiking. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But like, to me, environmentalism always seemed like a very straight thing. Like it's very straight middle class thing. And even like climate, they're like, we need to do it for the children and the grandchildren. I'm like, yeah, I don't have any. You got any other reasons? And they're like, the polar bear. I'm like, oh, screw the polar bear. What a horrible creature.
Oh, bears! Oh no!
They're mean. They're eating garbage. They're brutal. No, I feel bad for them. But still, like I'll never see one in my lifetime. I hope I don't, not in person. That'd be a terrifying thing. But like, what, like, so my husband, I came home one day and he was weeping about climate change. And I was like, what? And he read some article and he's from South Africa. So he's like, oh, South Africa going to be toast. And it really broke him. And he said, we need to do something. I'm like, okay, Well, that person you love is breaking down. You're like, all right, well,
Yeah.
go along. But my heart wasn't in it. He kept sending me articles, and I was like, ugh. And everyone had this chart. It was the same chart over and over with this thing going up. It didn't matter if it's carbon dioxide, it was heat. It was always like the same chart. I'm like, can you give me like, I don't know, a photograph or I don't know, a story?
Was that the Al Gore chart? Because didn't Al Gore, if I'm remembering, like he did like this huge
Yeah,
lecture,
he loved,
like it
yeah.
was a chart that kept on showing the progression of.
And it's referred to as the hockey stick because it just keeps going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But then he sent me an article one day that cracked me open. It was about drought and how on a warmer planet, drought will lead to all kinds of problems: malnutrition, starvation, internal conflicts, global conflicts, mass migration. I'm like, ah, that was hitting my heart because that's the stuff that moves me. But then it hit my gut because it said, on a warmer planet, we may see crop failures, including a global crop failure and shortage of wheat products, leading to a shortage of pasta products. I was like, wait, what? Like, pasta is an endangered species? No, because I'm Italian American and like just the thought, it's so stupid and shallow. I wish I were more profound, but
No,
the
no.
thought of like not being able to get pasta like was just, it just drove it home for me, and that got me really in. And then I learned there was more, obviously, than
Yeah,
just the pasta, but coffee and things that we love, will become more expensive, and we're saving the things we love, and all the beautiful cities on coast because of colonialism. We have to save those too, and the artwork. And it's not just about polar bears and grandchildren. It's about everything we love.
right.
It's about a
And
nice, pleasant day.
I think it also goes back to what you were saying. I think part of it also is community, and I think community in the sense that you know your neighbors, community in the sense of like you know what's going on in the town that you live in, and you're sort of
Mhm.
you're sort of engaged on some level in your community, and that's where the change process happens, right? In your local elections and
Mhm.
voting for your sheriffs, like those are sort of where the change process happens. And I think it goes back to what you said. It really is it's a community affair.
Yeah.
Yeah. As we're getting ready to wind down, um, what are the biggest, well, loaded question, um, lesson that you've learned on your journey in becoming not only a famous playwright, but a biblical scholar? Like, what are some lessons that you've learned? Let me back up. Let me rewind. If you had to mentor somebody in becoming a playwright, a performer, or even starting podcasts, like how would you advise or guide or ask them to read what particular material, or doing a YouTube search? Like how would you sort of mentor somebody who is interested in doing half of what you do on a daily basis?
I think it goes back to one of the first questions you asked me about curiosity. Curiosity is such a powerful, powerful way of approaching the world. I mean, with climate change, I'm so curious about how it all works. Not like the science of it. That's simple, but like so many other things. And like, what's the messaging that works? And, and if we do this, what will the future look like? So curiosity is so good. It gets us out of our comfort zones. It gets us listening to different opinions, which is so valuable because it's so easy to just get that reinforcement of what we already know, and we're just following group norms. But curiosity is so very critical. in this work and in life, and being open to take feedback. And I was fortunate because when I would work on a play, I would do a whole series of workshop performances and bring people in, and it was always very tender at first. I had to be my closest friends who understood me, and they would come to the first performance and give me some feedback, and then I would bring more people in and more people in, and the audience taught me, kind of what to cut, what not to cut. But being humble enough to just get that feedback, it takes years, particularly with writing, but or about like our personalities too. None of us are perfect. We have personality flaws, and that's one of the challenges when we get close to people. Suddenly, all the veneers rubbed off, and we see the bits that we like to hide. But don't be afraid of those bits. Those are the bits that make us human, and be open to hear the hard feedback when it comes, because I've never really been able to make my plays better by the compliments I've been given. It's always when someone's giving me some harsh feedback or just direct feedback that is like, oh, okay, good. So curiosity and being open to feedback, I think, are the two big things that I'm grateful that I've been learning over the years.
Yeah, I love that because I think you said this, it's a practice of being vulnerable, right? Like how do you if you're creating this intense, insightful, educational, whatever, there's a vulnerability that you have to be with when you present it to the world, or otherwise just keep it to yourself.
And vulnerability is so beautiful and so sexy and wonderful. Like when someone's vulnerable with me, it cracks me open. And I think everyone is, all of us, almost everyone, maybe there are three people who aren't, but that are insecure in one way or another, and always feel like there's a lack that we have. And we all share that thing.
Yeah.
It may be in a different way. And so people just roll over when they see vulnerability, and I do, at least.
Yeah, no, I do too. There's just, yeah, you're right. There's just something that's
You
really
can
beautiful.
scratch my belly now. Okay.
It's so true. It's so true. I love it. Oh my gosh, Peterson, I could like, let me tell you, I have like 50 questions, and I only got to like maybe like four or five of them.
Because I talk too much, that's why.
No, it's because you bring so much to the table in the sense of like not just your writing, but just like I feel like who you are as an individual is very authentic. I feel like from the moment I met you in like Bennington, Vermont, and like sort of like I think it was Bennington College
Yeah, yeah, that's
that
right.
you, that you did the performance in, and like who knew in that little corner of the world that I would meet somebody who was willing and open to share their journey, because I think a lot of people just like, nope, I'm just going to keep it to myself. I'm going to hold on to this particular trauma, and I'm not going to process it. And I think process comes in a different way for a lot of people, right? Like
Mhm.
yoga, singing, hiking, jumping out of planes, right? Like whatever it takes for you to process. And so I say thank you for being vulnerable to share that part of yourself, and just thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for doing the series, and engaging with people and revisiting people from the past. I was so thrilled when you reached out to me.
Yeah, and I apologize because I feel like um I don't want to bumble this up. I want this to be sort of like professional, and I realize that's not me.
Right. And this is why people love TikTok so much, because the things that get rewarded on TikTok, I don't know if you ever go to TikTok, but
Yeah.
I have a massive South African TikTok following because I started, and what I learned is those slick, perfectly tailored videos, they don't get attention. It's the ones that I'm bumbling and stumbling along that I just kind of threw together. People, it's like, I don't know, it values authenticity, and that is a very human thing. We don't want it to be perfect.
Yeah. I guess my challenge is always like I have a question, but I want to listen because everything that you're saying is so good. But thank you so much, Peterson, for hanging out with me for as long as you did with my slice of the internet. And for folks who've gotten this far, please give a thumbs up. And I'm going to put all of Peterson's information down below, his Instagram, his Facebook, all of that stuff. And Peterson, anything that you want to share, or folks who could get a hold of you, or
Yeah, I mean, if you can't find me, you haven't looked. I mean, you just literally look for like Peterson, climate change, transgender, you'll find me. There's any combination. But I would love a lot of people to watch and share Transfigurations, Transgressing Gender in the Bible. It's such an important time for that work to be out in the world. That's why it's free. There is this just unprecedented, horrible attack on trans and non-binary people, and they're a tiny population. I mean, the way the right makes it sound like every sports team has a man in a dress joining. It's like this is a tiny population who are much more a threat than anybody else that people are saying that they're threatening. And we need to stand in solidarity. But getting that work out to just show that like there are Bible stories that have people in them that are recognizable, that the very Bible that they're using to beat people up with. And I've seen people change when they see the scene about Joseph that I do, which I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but there's something hidden in the language in the Hebrew. And when I show them that, they can't unsee it. And they never see that story the same. Even if they disagree, they could never see that story the same way again.
check it out, folks. It's on YouTube. Gorgeous, beautiful. Peterson, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you.